Something is happening to you right now that you have been misreading as failure. The exhaustion that arrived without warning, the relationships that quietly fell apart, the plans that collapsed before they had a chance to become real, the version of your life you carefully constructed that suddenly stopped making sense, the feeling of being lost inside a chapter you did not choose and cannot seem to find your way out of. You have been interpreting all of it as evidence that something went wrong, that you made mistakes too large to recover from, that the life you imagined is moving further away rather than closer, that other people have something figured out that you have somehow missed. Carl Jung spent his life studying the patterns that appear in human beings right before their most profound transformations. And what he found, across thousands of people across decades of observation, was not what most people expect. He found that the darkness before a breakthrough is not random. It is not punishment. It is not evidence of failure or inadequacy or a life going in the wrong direction. It is the process itself. Every significant expansion of a human life is preceded by a period of pressure, confusion, loss, and disorientation that looks from the inside like things falling apart, but is actually things being rearranged. The caterpillar does not experience its transformation as becoming. It experiences it as dissolving. And from inside that dissolving, there is no way to know that wings are being built. You are not falling apart. You are being rearranged. Seneca wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. What feels like the collapse of everything is often the clearing of what was never meant to stay." Today we are going to walk through 7 things that happen to every human being right before the best chapter of their life begins. Not as comfort, not as empty reassurance, but as a map drawn from the deepest understanding of human psychology ever assembled, so that the next time life puts you through one of these passages, you recognize it for what it actually is, a beginning wearing the disguise of an ending. Whether you are watching this at midnight unable to sleep or in the morning finally ready to understand what you are going through, comment below. I am not falling apart. I am being rearranged. Number 1. Everything you built your identity around stops working. Your sense of who you are was constructed on foundations you did not consciously choose. The career that defined your worth. The relationship that gave your days their shape. The role you played so consistently that you stopped being able to distinguish between the role and the person underneath it. The beliefs about yourself that were handed to you early enough that they felt like facts rather than interpretations. The image you maintained across years of careful management that told you and everyone around you exactly who you were and what you stood for. And then something shifted, maybe gradually, maybe suddenly. And the foundations that your identity was built on began to feel unstable. The career lost its meaning. The relationship ended or changed beyond recognition. The role no longer fit the person you were quietly becoming underneath it. The beliefs that once felt solid began to feel like borrowed clothes you had been wearing so long you forgot they were not originally yours. Jung called this the collapse of the persona. The persona is the mask we construct for social survival, the organized, presentable, functional face we show the world. And for most of our lives, we mistake the persona for the self. We pour our energy into maintaining it, protecting it, ensuring that it remains consistent and coherent and respected. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you truly are requires first dismantling who you were pretending to be. And that dismantling does not feel like liberation when it is happening. It feels like loss. It feels like the ground disappearing. It feels like an identity crisis, because that is precisely what it is. An identity crisis is not a psychological emergency. It is a psychological necessity. It is the moment when the constructed self becomes too small to contain the real one. When the mask begins to crack, not because you are failing, but because what is underneath it has grown large enough to push through. The disorientation you feel when your old identity stops working is not confusion. It is the first honest breath you have taken in years. The first moment where the gap between who you have been performing and who you actually are becomes impossible to ignore. Do not rush to build a new identity on top of the rubble of the old one. Sit in the uncertainty long enough to find out who is actually there when the performance stops. That person, raw and unpolished and without the armor of the constructed self, is the one the next chapter is going to be built around. The collapse of who you were is the foundation of who you are becoming. It only feels like destruction because you are still standing close enough to see the dust. Number 2. You lose people you thought would always be there. Some departures announce themselves. Others simply happen, quietly and without ceremony, and you only recognize the ending in retrospect. A friendship that faded across a year of decreasing contact until one day you realized you could not remember the last real conversation. A relationship that ended not in a dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of distance that neither of you named until naming it was the only honest thing left to do. A family dynamic that shifted when you began changing, and the people around you preferred the older, more familiar version of you who did not ask the questions you are now asking. Losing people before a major life transition is one of the most painful and least discussed aspects of genuine growth, because growth is not universally welcomed by the people around you. Some people in your life have a relationship not with you, but with the specific version of you that existed when they met you. When you begin to change, they experience that change as a kind of betrayal, as you becoming someone they did not agree to know. Jung observed, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And one of the reasons it is terrifying is that complete self-acceptance often makes you incompatible with people who needed you to remain incomplete, who needed your self-doubt to justify their own, who needed your smallness to feel comfortable in their own size, who needed you to stay in the role you occupied in their story and found your departure from that role deeply unsettling. The people who leave as you grow are not villains. Most of them are simply people whose path and yours ran parallel for a season and have now diverged. Divergence is not betrayal. It is just the honest acknowledgement that two people are heading in different directions, and pretending otherwise would cost both of them something real. What feels like abandonment before a breakthrough is often alignment in disguise. Life clearing the space around you for the people and connections that match who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. It hurts with a specific and irreplaceable kind of pain. The pain of losing someone who was genuinely important to you. That pain is real, and it deserves to be felt honestly. But on the other side of that feeling, if you let yourself move through it rather than around it, you will find something unexpected. Room. Space that was previously occupied now open and available for something that fits the person you are in the process of becoming. The people meant for your next chapter cannot find their way to you, while every available space is still occupied by relationships that belong to the last one. Number 3. You are forced into a silence you did not choose. Life slows down in a way that feels like punishment. The activity and noise and forward momentum that kept you from having to sit with yourself suddenly disappears. An illness, a job loss, a heartbreak that makes socializing feel impossible. A period of enforced stillness that removes all the distractions you had been using to avoid the conversation your inner world had been trying to have with you for years. And in that silence, things surface. Feelings you buried under the busyness. Truths you knew but had successfully avoided confronting. Questions about your own life that the noise was keeping at a comfortable distance suddenly have no noise to hide behind. They arrive and they sit with you, and they will not be dismissed with activity because the activity is gone. Most people experience this forced silence as the worst thing that has happened to them, as something to escape as quickly as possible, as a problem to be solved rather than a passage to be moved through. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The forced silence before a breakthrough is not a punishment for anything you did or failed to do. It is an invitation, possibly the most important invitation your life will ever extend to you. An invitation to stop running long enough to find out what you are running from, to sit with yourself long enough to remember who you actually are underneath the roles and the noise and the constant performance of a functional life. What surfaces in the silence is not comfortable. Unexamined grief surfaces. Unacknowledged anger surfaces. Dreams you abandoned so long ago you had convinced yourself you no longer wanted them surface with a clarity that the busy years kept safely muffled. Parts of yourself that the noise was suppressing come forward and demand the honest engagement that you have been too distracted to offer them. This is not a breakdown. This is an awakening. The difference between the two is not how it feels from the inside. From the inside, they are indistinguishable. The difference is what you do with what surfaces, whether you rush back to noise as soon as an exit presents itself, or whether you stay in the silence long enough to hear what it came to tell you. Stay. Everything the silence brought to the surface arrived for a reason, and the reason, as uncomfortable as it is always pointing towards something your next chapter requires you to understand about yourself. The conversation your inner world is trying to have with you is the most important one you will ever have. Do not leave before it finishes. Number 4. Old patterns stop working and new ones have not arrived yet. The strategies that carried you this far have stopped producing results. The way you approached relationships that always worked before is generating outcomes you did not anticipate. The professional habits that built your early success are no longer sufficient for the level you are trying to reach. The coping mechanisms that got you through hard seasons in the past are either unavailable or failing to provide the relief they used to. The map you have been using to navigate your own life has stopped matching the terrain, and the new map has not arrived yet. This gap, the space between the old strategies becoming obsolete and the new ones becoming available, is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have. Because we are creatures of pattern, we rely on knowing how things work, on having a reliable method for navigating the challenges in front of us. When the method stops working and no replacement has materialized, the resulting uncertainty touches something very deep and very frightened in us. Jung described this as the necessary disorientation of genuine transformation. He understood that you cannot carry old tools into a new landscape and expect them to be sufficient, that the growth being demanded of you requires capabilities you have not yet developed, and the only way to develop them is to spend time in the uncomfortable territory where the old ones no longer work and the new ones are still being built. Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. Accepting that your old patterns have expired is not defeat. It is the first act of the intelligence required for what comes next. The person who insists on using a strategy that has stopped working is not being persistent. They are being afraid. Afraid that the absence of the old method means the absence of any method. Afraid that releasing what no longer works means being left with nothing. But the new patterns cannot be discovered from inside the old ones. They emerge in the gap, in the uncomfortable in-between, where you are no longer who you were and not yet who you are becoming. That space feels like emptiness, but it is actually potential. It is the blank page before the new chapter writes itself. Do not fill the gap prematurely with the first available distraction. Do not grab the nearest old pattern and force it to work past its expiry. Sit in the not yet knowing long enough for something genuinely new to emerge from the honest experience of being without a map. The new patterns are forming. They form in the discomfort. They form in the willingness to move without certainty. They form in the gap itself, not on either side of it. Trust the gap. It is where your next self is being assembled. Number 5. Your deepest fears rise to the surface and demand to be faced. Fears you managed to keep at a safe distance for years suddenly feel very close. The fear of being fundamentally unlovable that you covered with busyness and achievement and the constant maintenance of relationships. The fear of being truly seen and found wanting that you managed by staying slightly hidden even in your closest connections. The fear of failure so deep that it shaped every choice you made without you ever consciously naming it. The fear that you are not enough, have never been enough, will never be enough, surfacing now with a clarity and volume that your previous life managed to keep at a manageable murmur. Jung called these fears the shadow. The parts of ourselves that we refuse to integrate, the aspects of our own psychology that we deemed unacceptable and pushed into the darkness where they would not embarrass us or threaten the persona we were working so hard to maintain. The shadow does not disappear when we refuse to look at it. It grows. It accumulates everything we rejected about ourselves across years of careful avoidance. And before a major transformation, it rises. Not to destroy you, but because the next chapter of your life requires a wholeness that is impossible while you are still refusing to acknowledge half of yourself. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The fears rising to the surface before your breakthrough are not evidence that you are broken. They are evidence that you are being asked to become whole. To stop dividing yourself into the acceptable parts you show the world and the unacceptable parts you hide even from yourself. To look directly at what frightens you most about your own nature and discover that it has less power in the light than it ever had in the darkness. Facing a fear does not mean the fear disappears. It means the fear stops making your decisions for you. It means the thing you were most afraid to look at turns out to be survivable. That the worst part of yourself you were terrified to confront is not a monster, but a wound. And wounds, unlike monsters, can heal. Epictetus said, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." Your fears are not proof of your weakness. They are proof of everything you have been carrying alone. And carrying them into the light is the beginning of putting them down. Everything you were most afraid to face about yourself is standing at the entrance to your best chapter, not as a gatekeeper who will turn you away. As a passage. The only way through is directly into the thing you have been walking around for years. Walk into it. What is on the other side of your deepest fear is not what you imagined. It is freedom. The specific, irreplaceable freedom of someone who looked at the worst of themselves and survived the looking. Number 6. Life strips away everything that was covering up your real purpose. Comfort has a way of making the wrong life feel acceptable. When the salary is enough, and the routine is manageable, and the relationships are functional, and nothing is actively on fire, it is surprisingly easy to keep living in a life that fits you the way clothes in the wrong size fit. Wearable, not unbearable, but never quite right. Never quite aligned with the specific shape of who you actually are. And then life removes the comfort. The job disappears. The relationship ends. The routine that was holding everything in its familiar shape dissolves. The buffer that was standing between you and the honest question of whether this life is actually yours gets removed without your consent. And in the raw, exposed space where the comfort used to be, something surfaces that the comfort was covering. A calling that never disappeared, just went quiet under the noise of a life that was full enough to prevent you from noticing its absence. A sense of purpose that your constructed life never quite accommodated. A direction that the practical, sensible, responsible choices of your adult years managed to route around without ever quite extinguishing. Jung wrote, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Meaning is not optional. Not in the way that luxury is optional or convenience is optional. Meaning is a biological necessity. A life lived without it produces a specific kind of suffering that no amount of comfort, success, or distraction can permanently address. You can manage it. You can cover it. But it does not go away. The stripping away before the breakthrough is life removing the covering so that you cannot ignore what has been underneath it, so that you are finally, undeniably, uncomfortably confronted with the gap between the life you have been living and the life that your deepest nature has been trying to live through you. That confrontation is painful exactly in proportion to how large the gap was. The more you covered, the more exposure hurts. But the pain of that exposure is clarifying in a way that the comfortable numbness never was. It points, it directs, it tells you with unmistakable specificity what matters and what does not, and what your remaining time on earth is actually for. The life being stripped away was not your real life. It was the scaffolding around it. And scaffolding is only ever meant to be temporary. It exists to support construction, not to be mistaken for the building itself. What remains after the stripping is the building, raw and unfinished and with a great deal of work still to be done, but real, genuinely, specifically, irreplaceably yours. Build from what remains. That is the only material that ever needed to be used. Number 7. You feel like you are running out of time, and somehow that feeling is a gift. Urgency arrives. And it does not feel like motivation. It feels like panic wearing a philosophical mask. Like the sudden visceral awareness that time is moving and you are not moving with it. That the years you assumed you had in abundance are revealing themselves to be finite in a way that your younger self managed to treat as theoretical rather than real. That the life you kept meaning to get around to starting is waiting on the other side of a clock that does not slow down for intention. Most people experience this urgency as a crisis and try to escape it as quickly as possible. Into planning that never becomes action. Into distraction that temporarily muffles the feeling without resolving it. Into the comfortable story that there is still plenty of time and the feeling of urgency is just anxiety to be managed rather than information to be used. But the urgency before the breakthrough is not anxiety, it is clarity. It is the moment when the abstract understanding that time is finite becomes a lived, felt, undeniable reality that your entire system is responding to. Jung wrote, "Life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research." The research phase, the years of accumulating experience and making mistakes and discovering through lived evidence what works and what does not, and who you are not, that phase produces something that urgency then activates. It turns the accumulated self-knowledge of your research years into fuel for the construction of something real. The feeling of running out of time is not a symptom of a life going wrong. It is a signal from the deepest part of your intelligence that the season of preparation is ending and the season of building has begun, that the gap between knowing what you want and actually moving toward it has become too wide to maintain without cost, that something in you is done, waiting for conditions to be perfect and ready to begin in the imperfect conditions that actually exist. Use the urgency, not to panic, not to make frantic decisions that mistake speed for progress, but to finally close the gap between the life you have been living and the life you know you are capable of building. To stop treating your own deepest desires as things to get around to eventually and start treating them as things that deserve your full attention right now. Right now is not a rehearsal. The chapter that is about to begin is real. The person you are becoming through everything you have been through is real. And the life waiting on the other side of everything you have survived is not a distant possibility. It is the next thing. The urgency you feel is not the feeling of running out of time. It is the feeling of time finally becoming yours to use. 7 passages, 7 experiences that feel like endings but function as beginnings. Your identity collapsing under the weight of what you have outgrown, the people departing who belong to the chapter that is closing, the silence arriving to finally say what the noise was preventing, the old strategies expiring before the new ones are ready, the fears surfacing that can no longer be avoided, the comfort dissolving to expose what it was covering. and the urgency arriving to close the gap between who you have been and who you are finally ready to become. None of it is random. None of it is punishment. None of it is evidence that your life is going in the wrong direction. All of it is the process. The specific, universal, deeply human process that precedes every genuine transformation. The passage that every person who has ever stepped into the best chapter of their life had to move through first. Jung understood this because he lived it. He went through his own collapse, his own silence, his own confrontation with shadow, his own stripping away of everything comfortable and familiar. And what he built on the other side of that passage, the understanding of human psychology that still shapes how we understand ourselves a century later, would not have been possible without the darkness that preceded it. Your darkness is the same. Not identical in its details, but identical in its function. It is not what is happening to you, it is what is happening for you. The preparation for something that requires a larger, more honest, more fully realized person than the one who entered this passage. You are not the same person who started this video. Something has shifted. A small recognition, a loosening of the grip on the interpretation that this darkness means failure. A beginning of the understanding that what you are inside right now is not the end of your story, but the most important transition within it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The passage you are in right now is outside your control. What you choose to believe about it is entirely yours. Jung left us with this. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. What happened to you brought you here. What you choose to become starts now. The best chapter of your life does not begin after this passage ends. It begins the moment you understand what this passage is for. If this video found you at exactly the moment you needed it, share it with someone who is in the middle of their own darkness and does not yet know what it is building. And remember, you are not falling apart. You are being rearranged. And what is being assembled is something worth every moment of the discomfort it is costing you.